I remember turning 16 and deciding that I was a connoisseur of film. At that time, I had just got myself a copy of Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver and Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, so obviously, I wasn't fucking around. My mate from high school at the time was also taking the plunge and becoming more cultured, more sophisticated. He lent me a DVD that he was sure would satisfy my new refined taste. So I took the dog home and I threw it in my PS2. I began to watch the film with great expectation and vigour, before soon realising that it wasn't edgy enough for me, and to be completely frank, it was fucking boring. The synopsis is that Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, is an ex-police officer known as a Blade Runner. He's brought out of retirement to hunt down 4 synthetic humans known as replicants. The replicants are presumed dangerous as they seek to get in contact with their creator at the Tyrell Corporation with hopes of extending their artificially shortened lifespans. Along his trajectory, Deckard encounters Rachel, a replicant so close to human form that it has him questioning his involvement in the situation, as well as the moral implications. In my humbled opinion, Harrison Ford was phoning it in, while scenes took way too long for fuck all to happen. I found myself skipping through a decent portion of it. I tried to like this film, I really did. Believe me, the last thing I wanted to do was tarnish my reputation among my small group of artistically inclined friends. I went to school the next day and promptly returned the DVD. My mate then asked me, "What did you think?" To which I blew solid chunks of flaming bullshit out my lips when I said, "Yeah, I like it." He replied, "And what about the origami unicorn? What did you think of that?" Luckily, I'd managed to skip to the end and saw the origami unicorn thing. I had no fucking idea what it meant, but between you and me, by this point, I really didn't care. This interaction would go on to haunt me for years to come, because as it turns out, this movie is adored by people who claim to love film. Fuck yeah, so good. With time, I became a lot more blunt about my opinion for this film. It's long-winded, the acting bugs me, a lot of the sets are dreary, and it was the film's fault that I couldn't finish it. But if you don't see the appeal of an art form loved by millions, it almost feels condescending, as if this film and every cunt that loves it is better than you. And you're just a pleb. Go and enjoy your crass art forms, you uncultured swine. Go roll in the mud and filth where everything's easy and your perspective remains unchallenged by concepts that you are clearly not ready for. That was my experience with Blade Runner for 14 years. Astoundingly, the same thing happened to me around the 10-year mark when a mate of mine who was also passionate about film lent me his copy of Blade Runner 2049. That movie was even longer-winded, if it were possible, and it has Jared Leto in it. I fucking hate that cunt. And it's deeper and more philosophical, and I get the impression that the film knows it's better than me. And it's probably got a perfect credit score while successfully holding on to meaningful relationships with those around it. Fuck off. Leave me to my B-grade splatter flicks and my low IQ flashings of dopamine in peace. But then came the day where I found myself in somewhat of an altered state and prowling streaming services searching for something substantive. And that's when I had the idea. I'll give Blade Runner another chance, and fuck me, I was mesmerized. Within the film's 157-minute runtime, I had become the very thing I despised. It all made sense now as my mind was painted all over the walls of my embrace. Straight out the gate, something that Blade Runner does exceptionally well is atmosphere. With time, I've become a real slut for backdrops, and I'm a sucker for worlds within film that seem real. The world within Blade Runner is tangible. It's a living, breathing organism. And I know it can sound a little bit wanky when someone says the location was a character itself, but it's fucking true this time. The world of Blade Runner is so beautifully bleak. It invokes so many different emotions, and it's just fucking wet. Most frequently, the scenes drip with neon lights. Barely a scene grants the audience member an escape from this. A barrage of advertisements' glowing influence. But despite that, I just want to be there. I don't even know why. It would be horrible, it would smell horrible, it's so fucking wet. But like a moth to a flame, I'd happily die in this glowing mess. I mentioned my previous dislike for Harrison Ford's performance, but there's actually an age-long debate as to whether or not Deckard is or isn't a replicant. The replicant angle actually justifies the stilted performance. As well as that, it's been stated that Harrison Ford's acting style and Ridley Scott's directing style were far too conflicting. Ridley had full faith that Harrison would be up to the task, whereas Harrison is the kind of actor that needs a more hands-on director. Ridley just wasn't that at this point of his career. He was a creative visionary first and a director second. As well as that, it took me some growing up from being an edgelord that loves gore and stupid shit to realise that Blade Runner is a neo-noir sci-fi. Harrison's character Deckard is a faithful representation of every booze-hound PI with marital problems and a shady past. Blade Runner's film noir visual aesthetic is owed heavily to where most of the filming took place, that being the iconic Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank, California. This same location had been used prior to shoot various iconic film noir classics such as The Maltese Falcon and The Big Sleep. So the film noir DNA was present in Blade Runner even after a sickening neon makeover. But look, the characters still say and do weird shit, while the romance in this film is fucking a bit awkward. But while I now am trying to defend the film, the replicant argument actually helps to clear up this awkwardness. In the wake of me potentially being labelled a misogynist for this viewpoint, Rachel is a replicant and she would be a pleasure model replicant. So this would be exactly how it would play out if she was Deckard's personal replicant. In universe, it wouldn't be considered taboo, it would just be a man and his sex machine. My mind can't help but wonder, so Eldon Tyrell, corporate head and founder of Tyrell Corporation, had Rachel created using memories of his niece. I really hope she wasn't his personal pleasure model. The sequel goes on to say that Rachel was a prototype of a replicant designed to be able to fall pregnant, and honestly, I don't know if this makes things better or if this just fucking makes it fucking fucked. But man, the visuals, and the copyright gods won't allow for it, but the soundtrack. Composed by Greek pop musician turned grandfather of the synthesizer and digital composition, Vangelis. Vangelis was known to have a hands-on approach to making music. He was apparently unable to read or write music, and he was just one of those super talented motherfuckers that makes you wonder why you even bother. His process involved sculpting, arranging, composing, producing, and performing the final piece onto quarter-inch tape. The bleak and somber tones of Blade Runner were conceived using a mixture of modern synthesizers, vintage synthesizers, various forms of percussion, FM synthesizers, drum machines, and digital sampling. Vangelis would watch a scene from the film intently, taking notes on how he felt watching the subtle facial expressions, as well as the tonality of the scene he was observing. Ridley Scott remarked that Vangelis would cue off every frame, he would cue off every actor. Vangelis thinks himself into the film. So, it's no accident that the film's soundtrack accounts for so much of the film's personality and tone. Sound designer Peter Purnell and his team worked closely with what Vangelis produced. They used synthesizers and real-world sounds to add a third dimension to the film's soundscape. As a result, this film is an enhanced experience with headphones on. You instantly become transported to this dingy futurescape, and if you're anything like me, you just don't want to leave. Something this film does like no other is the ability to make me recede into my monkey brain and enjoy the stimuli until it comes to the moments where it wants to make me think or feel a certain way. And of course, this is a film with ample debate about what it means if Deckard is or isn't a replicant. There's also various versions of the film floating about in the ether, but if you watch the one that I watched, it's the director's cut version, where Ridley Scott forces the audience into a headlock with the inclusion of one scene to say, yes, Deckard is a replicant. I used to take issue with this sentiment. For me, Blade Runner was a story of a man who's conditioned by his harsh profession but becomes morally conflicted when he feels a genuine connection towards one of the very individuals he hunts for a living. It's a classic Greek tragedy that shows Deckard out of sync with the world and conflicted by circumstances. It's relatable. I've been Deckard in my daily life multiple times. Stripping him of this human status originally felt cheap. It felt as if the relatability of the character had been diminished. Until I drew a comparison between what I was watching and life in the modern age. The AI arms race is swiftly becoming a topic for concern among all levels of society. From blue-collar workers to modern-day businessmen to hopeful artists. This new tool is beyond anything we've had access to prior. Now, think of replicants as AI. That's exactly what they are, the evolution of such. Deckard is an AI that doesn't know it's an AI. And while this makes for an interesting plot device, we're really not that far from this becoming a reality. An AI so deep in the trenches, going about its duties, feeling exhausted, jaded, questioning its place in the world. This is eerily prophetic. Something on this topic that I find extremely interesting is the fact that Harrison Ford disagrees with Ridley Scott. Where this conundrum becomes infinitely more interesting to ponder, what if Ridley Scott told Harrison Ford that his character Rick Deckard wasn't a replicant, with the intention of creating organic dissonance within the character? It would be such a creatively big dick moment for Ridley, but it's hard to know for certain because whenever Ridley in the modern day opens his mouth about his once iconic creations, he has a tendency to shit all over them. Please, Ridley, just sit down, man, let's not make things any worse. And how's about the money shot? The film's main antagonist, Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer, delivers the most profound monologue at the end of the goddamn film. This monologue, the one that's apparently improvised, it brought a tear to my goddamn eye. This monologue is cinema. If some hostile alien life force landed here on Earth, surely we'd feel compelled to show it this scene. If for no other reason but to prove that we are worthy of being spared on this floating space rock. Or to help explain a facet of our collective experience in a couple of sentences. Somehow, Roy Batty, the supposed antagonist of the film, who's far more likable and charismatic than Deckard, delivers a monologue that makes the audience feel
more human than human.
I was not fucking ready for this. I suggest you watch this film, get to this part, shut out your stupid fucking smartphone and just absorb. Then, tell me you don't feel something. A mate of mine was battling cancer around the time that I rewatched this film. Call it circumstances, but this film hit me with a lesson of mortality. It was the theme the whole way through, but in these fleeting moments the execution was perfect. So much so that I could look past any of the film's shortcomings. It was almost as if the film itself was also human. Perfectly imperfect, flush with flaws. We all have our own expiration date. I guess, at the end of it all, I was just as pompous, just as insufferable, and every bit as entitled as all the people that enjoyed this film before me. But this wasn't some righteous path that I had to trudge upon once I was ready or once I was deemed worthy of doing so. This was a person coming face to face with facets of the human experience through a work of fiction, and in a manner that was purely circumstantial. After a lifetime of rejecting the material, I could throw around such labels as high art or patricianist media, but that doesn't guarantee that this film will have the same impact on you as it did on me. On a lighter note, after a long and grueling battle, my mate beat the cancer, and soon after I took him to the theatre to watch a special viewing of Blade Runner on 35mm. So I think it's fair to say, we're actually better than you. Better than all of you.